ReikiOasis.com. And then also, I do have a Reiki masterclass coming up the second Saturday in April, April 9th. And if you're interested in learning Reiki, you can check it out at schedule.reikioasis.com or just send me an email at reikioasis@gmail.com and get some more information. And then I just want to check in with astrology very quickly and then bring my guest on because we have a lot of wonderful things to talk about today. You're going to love the show. So welcome to the end of March. And tomorrow is April 1st. It is not for the foolish. It might be for fools because fools rush in, right? But
it's wild, Loretta, if you don't mind me jumping in here with us. I know it's a busy day for many. I'm usually on my A game right out the gate. Like about 8 hours into it, everyone's kind of doing their little foolish thing, and I'll let my guard down for like 1 second, and then I get followed for it. Like, it's just, I can't do it. I can't go all day. It's weird.
I know. I hear you. It's there.
Maybe it's just because I'm so gullible.
I don't know. I tend to be
like, how do
I don't know. I tend to be gullible, but I think sensitive people sometimes, and people with good hearts, I'm going to put it that way. We believe in the goodness of the world. I know, hearts and love. Sorry, everybody.
Specifically for me, that's so sweet.
We tend to trust people over and over again, Benny, and then here we are. What can I say?
Yeah, all right. Well, that makes good sense. Thank you.
Yeah, there it is. Yeah. So we are actually ending March and beginning April with a new moon in Aries and the strong presence of Chiron, the wounded healer, conjunct the sun, meaning the sun is shining on the healing, hopefully not the wound. We'll have to take a look at that. So the energy is going to help us turn our wounds into sources of strength, wisdom, and healing. And it really, starting the month like this is really setting the stage for the entire month of April. April is full of irritations, which might just be opportunities for growth, right? Or potentials to kind of rub off that roughness so that we can shine, sort of like when they put stones in and polish them. When I was a little girl, we used to go to Agate Beach in Oregon all the time, one of my favorite places on the planet. And we would always find these agates, these raw agates. And then my cousins had these polishing machines, and I was fascinated. I was like
those little tumblers.
Oh, yeah, the tumblers.
Those were the best.
Yeah, it was just the best. And they would come out and they would be just like, oh, they're so beautiful.
Sparkling.
Yeah. Yeah, I still have a bunch of them. So anyway, that's kind of what's happening. So maybe you're going to go from that rough surface to that beautiful, shiny, wonderful person. The two biggest cosmic events in April are the alignment of Jupiter and Neptune in Pisces on April 12th. Everyone is talking about it. Get ready for it. And the Taurus solar new moon eclipse on the 30th. It's hot. Hot. Big happenings. April 4th through 6th, Mars. Mars is about war or heated energy, right? And Saturn is sometimes called the karmic lord, right? Makes us look at stuff, but they're conjunct in Aquarius, which is about new thought, new way of being. And it can bring harsh truths to the surface. That's the 4th through the 6th. And at this time, we cannot ignore our responsibilities. We can no longer drag our feet or slack off or procrastinate. The energies are not going to let you do it. The energy may bring the need for quick action. It can also be volatile and bring things to a head. That could be personally, it could be globally. On April 12th, like I mentioned, the Jupiter-Neptune conjunction in Pisces is not only the event of the month, but of the year. Jupiter and Neptune align in our cosmic skies every 13 years or so, but this is the first time they've come together in Pisces in over 166 years, and they will not do it again for another 166 years. This is the most intense energetic combination, as Jupiter is considered the ancient ruler of Pisces, and Neptune is considered the modern ruler of Pisces. two rulers, two kings come together, one of them old and one of them new. I'm just letting that sink in. So this is very high vibration. Neptune is the planet of unconditional love, and Jupiter is the planet of expansion, love and expansion. What? And as they join forces, or will they join forces, we can be reminded of our connection to each other. Rather than seeing division, we can see that we are connected, that we all deserve love, and separation is just an illusion. We can do that, or we can go the other way. It encourages us to go in a positive direction. And under this energy, the universe will be offering waves of energy that support unity, coming together, enhancing life, raising our consciousness, whatever that means. And we'll be aware that even though Jupiter and Neptune can trigger spiritual growth and new vision, it can also create a disconnect from reality that can show up in escaping and unhealthy behaviors. Jupiter and Neptune also influence water. There may be flooding or water issues or high emotions with lots of watery tears, so have your hankies close by. There's nothing wrong with crying, by the way. It's chemical, it's alchemical. It's good for you. This energy, though, is going to be tugging and calling forward healers, psychics, creatives, like artists and musicians and people that do creative things, and spiritual teachers. And it's going to awaken your gifts or your desire to serve and help, or to offer the gifts to the world, which is the best thing you can do. So as Neptune energy can be dreamy or vague, you might also be having dreams, visions. A lot of our life is tied in with that dreamy world. So this is the time to become more familiar with and comfortable with your own intuition. And always, 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 when we're in these great spaces of growth, ground yourself deeply. Put your roots deep down into that earth. Do things that remind you that you are a human in a body. And I don't know, sometimes it goes back to the basics, right? That's what it is. You know, when your kids are all worn out, Benny, when those twins, you know, they need sleep and water and exercise and, yep.
Have to. Oh, did you hear me there? I'm back there. Sorry about that. It's all in, I guess, relaxation. You have to kind of manage it all appropriately. A little bit of here, a little bit of there. It all kind of just, you got to take care of yourself. You can't do it all at once. Especially
with twins.
Yeah, loving it.
Yeah. I have twins inside me. No. No, I don't.
The good
Loretta and the bad Loretta. I don't know. Anyway.
I'm curious about where you were gonna go with that one. Wait, is it April Fool's Day? Oh no, that's
that's tomorrow. Okay. That's tomorrow.
All right. Phew.
Anyway, I want to bring my guest on. We're gonna have a great, wonderful conversation after all of that. My guest this week is Jeffrey Mishlove, PhD. Jeffrey is a licensed clinical psychologist and accomplished radio and television interviewer. He's the host of Thinking Aloud. I love that. And one of the most articulate personalities on television. He is the author of many wonderful books, and one of them is a very encyclopedic volume, The Roots of Consciousness. He also wrote The PK Man, a true story of mind over matter, which presents the results of his 10-year case study involving UFO appearances, power blackouts, ending of droughts, and other large-scale phenomena. And he holds the world's only doctoral diploma in parapsychology ever awarded by an accredited university. It's really quite the accomplishment. And in November, Jeffrey was the first place winner of the Bigelow Institute in Las Vegas essay competition for his essay, Beyond the Brain, the Survival of Human Consciousness After Permanent Bodily Death. Wow, fascinating. Welcome to the show, Jeffrey. I'm so glad to have you.
Thank you, Loretta. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Yeah. I have so much, like you're really an expert and encyclopedia of all kinds of things. I would love to just jump in and ask you, what is parapsychology? What is your definition of that? So just to jump.
Parapsychology is a scientific field The Parapsychological Association is an affiliate organization of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. And parapsychology basically studies three things: extrasensory perception, the ability to telepathy, clairvoyance, precognition; psychokinesis, or mind over matter, which can include healing; and the question of the survival of consciousness after permanent bodily death.
Oh, that's wonderful. I love it. I have to ask you, how did you get involved in that? I mean, what drew what drew you to parapsychology?
Well, I started out as a pretty conventional person. Growing up in the Midwest, my father owned a furniture store, and I imagined I'd probably take over the furniture business. But as I got into college in the 1960s, it was a time of, I don't know how many of your viewers or listeners remember the 60s, but it was a time of incredible ferment. And pretty soon I got, how can I put it gently? I became part of the wave of young people using psychedelics. I became interested in mysticism. I actually wrote a senior honors thesis at the University of Wisconsin in 1969 on the psychology of religious mysticism. And I went into it thinking, I will describe forms of psychopathology that people have that give them the deluded idea that they can see spirits and the like. But as I began studying, I came across the work of people like Abraham Maslow, who had studied the most successful people in our culture. And he pointed out that they pretty much all have had mystical experiences that they regard as central to their success in life. And that caused me to have a change of heart about the whole field. And shortly after that, I began having all kinds of psychic experiences of my own that led me to drop out of the program I was in at Berkeley at the time, criminology, and create a unique degree in parapsychology.
Yeah, those are related. Yeah.
Well, they both have to do with human deviance. And I was studying crime and psychopathology. And after what happened is my great uncle Harry died, and he came to me in a dream at the moment of his death. It was such a powerful dream. I've never had a dream like that before or since. And that was 50 years ago.
Wow.
I woke up from that dream crying tears of joy and singing one of the most sacred songs in the Jewish religious liturgy. And at that point, I realized I had to shift. Instead of studying negative forms of human deviance, which you can study at any university, I wanted to study the positive side. And it was almost impossible. They don't have courses in parapsychology and mysticism and creativity and intuition, hardly at all at any universities. So I struggled over this. And to be honest, I was guided by dreams to in fact, to do what I'm doing with you right now, or you're doing with me right now, to become an interviewer on the radio. My dreams led me there, and which was a surprise because at the time I didn't own a radio or a TV. I didn't believe in them. I was this long-haired hippie who thought that all electronic communication was phony baloney, that the only meaningful communication had to be face-to-face. But at that moment, I changed my mind. I went and volunteered at the local nonprofit radio station in Berkeley, KPFA, Pacifica Radio. And they said to me, here, sit at this desk, and when you hear somebody press the doorbell and the buzzer, you push this button and let them in the front door. And even though I had my master's degree by then, I was glad to do it. And within 3 weeks, I had learned how to produce a radio program. And the program director liked it so much, he said, we have a regular slot for you every Tuesday and Thursday at noon. And all of a sudden, I was sitting across a table with world-class experts in the very fields that I wanted to learn about, and with 10,000 people or more listening in. And that's what gave me the confidence to go back to the university and create my own individual interdisciplinary doctoral major in parapsychology.
Wow, I love your story so much. There's so much in there. I want you to. Which question should I ask first? Like I need like 10 mouths. No, don't say anything. Don't say that. So you, I do want to touch on this degree that you have in parapsychology, and then I want to go back and talk about dreams a little more, is what I'd love to do. So please talk about this degree, because this is actually a big deal, and I want people to get it.
Well,
Yeah.
let me say this. There are probably several hundred people who did doctoral level research on parapsychological topics. The only thing that makes my degree unique is I have a diploma that says parapsychology on it. The others all have diplomas that don't say it just that way. In England today, there are a dozen universities where you can do research in parapsychology. So the field is slowly expanding. And more so in Europe, I think, than in the United States these days. Unfortunately, since I got my degree in 1980, there hasn't been a single doctoral diploma in parapsychology awarded in the United States. Although there's maybe one or two schools where you can do parapsychology research and get a diploma that says psychology.
Yeah, I could ask the question, why do you think that is? Why are they not issuing that, or why are not they not presenting a study in that area?
Well, to be honest, there's enormous hostility in the professional field, especially psychology and in the sciences, because we live in a materialistic culture. You mentioned this interesting conjunction of Jupiter and Neptune that goes back 166 years. That was really the height of the materialistic culture in Western civilization. And now we're at a point where I think many people realize materialism is a dead end. Materialism is leading us to, amongst other things, pollute the planet. Materialism is leading people to pursue personal acquisition of various toys and commodities at the expense of each other and the planet itself, and living organisms that are dying out because of the way we're treating the planet. But even more directly in fields like physics, we understand that when you probe down to the subatomic level, you're no longer even dealing with what we think of as dead material. At the quantum level, matter isn't what we used to think it was, like tiny little ping pong balls or billiard balls bouncing off of each other. Some people say it's all mathematical or it's all information, but there's a growing group of people who say, no, it's consciousness. Consciousness itself is the basis of reality, and the whole universe is alive.
Well, that brings up a big question, like, what is consciousness? Does that exist outside of us? Does the brain create consciousness? What is consciousness?
Well, conventionally, of course, anybody in the field of neuroscience will tell you that the brain creates consciousness. And back about 25, 35 years ago, I interviewed Francis Crick, the Nobel laureate, who was the one who discovered the double helix nature of DNA, which probably one of the great discoveries of the 20th century. And he had just published a book called The Astonishing Hypothesis, and his hypothesis was the brain creates consciousness. So I was interviewing him about it, and he said to me, it's just a hypothesis. Most people think it's already been proven, but it hasn't been. He said, in fact, the religious point of view that consciousness survives the death of the body could actually be correct. And in my studies, I would say, of course, it is correct. The evidence is overwhelming if you look at it, but people who have a materialistic bias don't even want to look at the evidence. They pretend it doesn't exist. So there you have it.
Yeah, to me, because we are going to be talking about the afterlife, because that is that's what you wrote your essay on, right? And also you have so much other information, but I think it is one of those things where people are like, what is it? What is consciousness? What is the human? And is there life after death? Does anything continue on, or when we're dead, are we just dead? What does that mean?
We could spend the whole hour just trying to dig into that. But let me say that when I talk about consciousness, we all understand our personal consciousness. We know what that is, but it would be a mistake to think that my personal consciousness is what the universe was born out of. So we have this idea of consciousness or mind at large, that there's a larger consciousness that our personal consciousness is embedded in. And so you could say it's not so much that the brain creates consciousness, but that consciousness creates the brain.
Oh, yeah. Okay. You say stuff and I have to sit with it. It sinks in. I get it. We're going to go ahead and take a little station break. I think this is a good point to do it because I literally have so many questions for you, Jeffrey. I'm jumbling around a little bit because everything is like 10 questions. This is Loretta Brown. My guest today, Jeffrey Bigelow, or excuse me. That was a Freudian slip. Maybe there's something there. Jeffrey Mishlove, PhD, and we're going to be talking about his essay, Beyond the Brain, the survival of human consciousness after permanent bodily death. And also, he was the first place winner of the Bigelow Institute essay contest in Las Vegas. And so apparently you're part of the family. Anyway, we've got lots of great things to talk about. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
Okay, all clear. Still live on YouTube.
You were talking about this incident with your Uncle Harry, which is like 50 years ago now. Wow. And I can feel the emotion of it. I've read your essay. You were not close to your Uncle Harry necessarily, right?
I hadn't really spent much time with him since I was a child. But we loved Uncle Harry. He was a wonderful man. He ran a little corner grocery store in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, 40 miles from where I grew up in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. And every time we would come and visit him, he'd walk into the grocery store. He lived in a little apartment behind the store, and he had a freezer full of Eskimo pies, and he'd pull them out and hand one to each of the children. So when you're a 7-year-old kid and you have an uncle who has a freezer full of Eskimo pies, he was like the richest man in the world.
Yeah. I also watched the video, that was in your paper. It's very touching. You're singing, and you say you came out of that dream singing. Yeah.
It's a song called Avinu Malkeinu, which is only sung in the Jewish high holy holidays.
Wow. You also got a book that belonged to him.
Yeah.
You still have that book?
I still have the book. After he died, I wrote home and said, could I have something of Uncle Harry's to remember him by? And they sent me a book. They said this was Uncle Harry's
And I hate to interrupt on you there,
favorite book.
Doctor. I got to bring you in here. Hang on.
Thank you, Benny. Yeah. By the way, I do believe in dance breaks, and that could just be like, sometimes you just have to do it, right? Get the energy moving. Anyway, welcome back to the original Loretta Brown Show. I am Loretta Brown. You can find out more about me at ReikiOasis.com and also the archives at KKNW 1150 AM. These shows are archived. You can download them and listen to them. And of course, we're on Podcast One, iTunes, Spotify. We're all over the place. So make sure that you enjoy all of that. My guest this week is Jeffrey Mishlov, PhD. And he really is, I don't know, Jeffrey, you've got so many radio, television interviews out there. You've got wonderful books out there. And we are talking about his essay, Beyond the Brain, The Survival of Human Consciousness After Permanent Bodily Death. Before the break and during the break, I was asking you about your Uncle Harry, which was this afterlife encounter. I wanted to ask you, I also had an experience actually the morning my father died, where I woke up and he was standing next to the bed and said, "Can I go?" And I was sleepy and I said, "Yes." And then I sat up and went, "What?" And then I got a call that he had just passed. So I want to ask you, when do most communications, afterlife communications, take place? Is there a normal time for that, or?
It turns out that a very high percentage of them occur right at the moment of death. That's an especially profound moment. And I know researchers who have studied it carefully feel that it's often right after death or shortly thereafter that people on the other side want to visit their loved ones to say goodbye.
Yeah.
But of course, they can occur well after that as also.
Yeah. I've interviewed a lot of people, and there is quite often that appearance or that connection. And often people have no prior experience with this sort of thing. It just happens. And so they don't know who to talk to or what to say, because, we don't want to be labeled crazy, right? Yeah. So you've done a lot of research into this. You have a lot of information. I want to ask you a couple of questions. How does the parapsychology community view the evidence for an afterlife?
It's tricky because before parapsychology became a recognized science, there was an earlier discipline called psychical research, founded in 1882 in England, and they really focused on life after death. But then in the 1930s, J.B. Rhine at Duke University began doing experiments on ESP, card guessing experiments, dice throwing experiments, and psychokinesis. And he began developing statistical double-blind experiments showing that living humans have this ability, psychic abilities. And people quickly noticed that you could probably explain away all the evidence for survival after death by saying, oh, this is simply the psychic ability of living people. And so Rhine felt that for the time being, let's focus on that. We can measure it, we can study it more scientifically than life after death. And so the parapsychology community, by and large, has leaned in favor of studying psychic abilities of living people. And most of them say we can deal with life after death maybe sometime in the future when we have better scientific techniques than we currently have.
I'm thinking while you're talking, because I have heard people say things like, well, that is just in the memory field of that person, right? Like that deceased person isn't really around, it's just there.
Their memories,
Yeah. You talk about I have a little chart here called the spectrum of arrows. And there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You have nine things, right?
Yeah.
And can you talk about these things that help, I would say, prove the afterlife, you know?
Yeah, 9 different independent lines of evidence that all
Mhm.
point in the direction of survival after death. The obvious ones are communication from spiritualist mediums, but there's also reincarnation research. The University of Virginia, for example, they've been studying reincarnation memories of young children almost as soon as they begin to speak, talk about their past life memories. They have over 2,700 cases like this in their files that have been researched, and approximately 1,700 of them have been solved in the sense that the information provided by the young children is sufficient to actually identify who the previous person was. So that's important. There's also near-death experience. We now know millions of people have had these near-death experiences, and for them it's like going to heaven and coming back. And they've done studies in hospitals now where people are in the hospital typically for heart problems. They have a cardiac arrest right there in the hospital. Approximately 18% of the people who have a cardiac arrest and are revived have these near-death experiences where they report essentially an afterlife encounter. You have deathbed visions, and you have people who are communicating electronically with the deceased. There are tens of thousands of hobbyists using electronic equipment, radios, computers, and they claim that they're having two-way conversations with their loved ones using these techniques. Some of them have been recorded, and while many of these communications are hard for a stranger to make out, some of them are very clear and distinct and unmistakable. So if you add all of this up and a few other categories in there as well, the evidence is overwhelming that survival after death is actually occurring.
Your essay to me was fascinating. I really enjoyed it. I listened to a lot of the little videos you had attached to it, but I want to say this, that as you're going through it, you know, because I love these 9 areas here, all of these areas in my opinion are highly talked about, and you bring forth evidence, right? You have this empirical evidence, which is so lovely to take a look at, because you have in there, for instance, you know, with I'm going to say you have these stories about people who were like the Shiva, I think it's Sumitra or something. You know, you have this.
Shiva Sumitra case is
Yes.
a case of possession. That's a very strong case.
Yeah. And can you tell the audience about that? Because I was fascinated by that. And what is the
Yes,
difference between that? I mean, you know, people talk about possessions in a very negative way, like you're possessed by a demon or something. But can you please talk about that?
sometimes it's called replacement reincarnation.
Mhm.
And in this instance, there in India, there was a woman named Sumitra Singh, and she got ill. And parents even thought she was dead. They were getting ready to cremate the body when all of a sudden she sat up and looked around. And the interesting thing is, this is a family where Sumitra Singh was a young, uneducated woman. But all of a sudden, we've got an educated woman sitting up, one who is now speaking in a different accent. And she says, I don't recognize who these people are. My name is Shiva Tripathi. I am not Sumitra. I was murdered a few months ago, and she wakes up in this body. She describes the experience. I was in the paradise with Yama, the Lord of Death, and he arranged for me to be able to return in this body. And eventually, it turned out the Tripathi family, who lived about 60 miles away in another village, they heard about this case, that somebody claiming to be their deceased daughter was manifesting through the body of another woman. And the family came, and at this point, Shiva, she insisted on being called Shiva, recognized all of her family members, talked to them, hugged them, asked about her children, and they accepted her as their daughter. I even tried to find work for her husband, because now, Sumitra Singh's husband is still married to this woman in this body. So Shiva ends up, being married to a man she didn't know, but she lived out her life that way. Many researchers followed this case. Shiva lived in the body of Sumitra about 13 more years. The entire time, she insisted she was Shiva. She was not Sumitra. She had Shiva's memories. She didn't have Sumitra's memories. So it stands as one of the very strongest cases that we have for survival after death.
Yeah, I was fascinated by that. And I don't actually know if there was a movie out about it, but it seems to me that I watched something a few months ago. There's always this weird synchronicity, right?
BBC News did a story on the case, and I actually included a video excerpt from BBC News in the essay.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I must have been getting ready for talking to you, because I saw that. When we talk about reincarnation, you mention in your essay something about intermission memories. What are intermission memories, and what is the length of intermission time between lives?
Well, yes, if we look at reincarnation, there's usually a period of time when one remains in the afterlife before entering into a new incarnation. And that period of time seems to vary culture by culture, but maybe it's because in Western culture, it could be 30, 40 years, whereas in Eastern culture, particularly in Burma, it might be a matter of months. So we need more data before we can make more sense of it. But in effect, people are describing what life is like on the other side. And the descriptions that they come up with are very similar to the descriptions that we get from people who have the near-death experience. There's also very detailed descriptions of the afterlife that comes through in the mediumship literature and the literature of automatic writing. And most interesting of all is a book called The Road to Immortality, written in 1932. It was through automatic writing by an Irish automatic writer named Geraldine Cummins, supposedly dictated to her by Frederick Myers, the great psychical researcher who wrote the classic book, Human Personality and Its Survival After Death. He died in 1902. So after being in the afterlife for some 30 years, he began to, through this automatic writing process, describe in great detail what the afterlife is all about. And I think it's one of the best examples that we have of the possibility that we can begin to explore these afterlife regions, much in the way people in the 14th, 15th, 16th century began exploring a new continent.
Yeah, you also talk about somebody playing chess with someone in your essay.
Yeah. Again, one of the very most impressive cases, I call it the chess game from beyond the grave. And this is a case where a researcher thought, if we could get a deceased chess player working through a medium to play a game of chess with a living chess master, wouldn't that be strong evidence for survival after death? So he knew a medium, and he said, can't you have your spirit guide ask around to see if there are any deceased chess masters around who would be willing to play a game? And he enlisted the help of Victor Korchnoi, who was at the time ranked the #2 chess player in the world. And they got a deceased spirit speaking through the medium in Hungarian and later in German, a fellow named Geza Maraxi, who had died in 1953, as I recall. This is in the 1980s, so we're talking, 30 years later, and he's saying, sure, I'll play Korchnoi in chess. And so this game lasted for 6 or 7 years because Korchnoi's traveling all over the world and they have to do it move by move and communicate the moves through the mail. But people have studied the chess game. Korchnoi won, but barely. He was almost defeated by the deceased Maraxi. And if you examine the moves in detail, as some chess players have done, you can see that Maraxi's game of chess was played the way a chess master who had died in 1953 would have played the game. Of course, there have been new developments in the game of chess over the decades. So they also determined that none of the chess playing computers could have mimicked that game at that time. So, and furthermore, Maraxi, speaking through the medium, Robert Rollins was the name of the medium, who didn't know how to play chess at all, gave dozens and dozens of intimate details about his personal life, things that were very hard for the researchers even to verify. They had to get a professional librarian to go through all the records of different chess games and so on. And the information turned out to be like 99% accurate. Very obscure details of Maraxi's life. So that case alone is overwhelmingly evidential of not just the survival of memories, but the survival of a learned skill, chess playing. That's not something you can readily duplicate.
Yeah, that to me is fascinating. It's mind-boggling. Absolutely, yeah. I love that. Thank you for sharing all that. Other ways, and you brought this up because I'm looking at your 9 areas here. Other ways have to do with electronic communication. What is direct radio voice? And
this is, direct radio voice is an example of where you tune your radio to the space between the stations where it's just white noise. So you got white noise coming through the radio. And at that point, you may hear voices coming through. And if you're gifted, now I do think it takes a certain amount of mediumistic talent to do this. It's not, there are tens of thousands of hobbyists who do it, but the very best evidence of which I'm aware was produced by a woman named Anabela Cardoso in Portugal. She was a diplomat. She was charged affairs in the Portuguese embassies in Japan and in India. I think she also worked in the United States. She was a very high-level diplomat. And she began experimenting with this, and it turned out she had enormous talent. And people have observed her interacting. Researchers have watched her. She's even published scientific studies in different journals, working in a high-tech laboratory, completely radio shielded, so that it couldn't be any extraneous voices. And when you're having when you've got a radio, which is only a one-way instrument, you're a radio receiver, not a sender, but you're able to have a two-way conversation with a voice coming through the radio that addresses you in your childhood name and talks about you with events from your childhood and identifies itself as your deceased parent. And other people can listen in on the conversation and recognize that it is clear and distinct and unmistakable. That's very strong evidence.
That's mind-boggling. I have had people on the show. I had a woman on the show a while back whose husband had passed to the other side, and he would turn on the hair dryer in the bathroom because that was kind of a joke between them. And she'd be in the kitchen or somewhere, and the hair dryer would come on, and it would just go and go and go until she went in there, and then it'd turn off, right? you know. Yeah.
Well, a lot of these things occur spontaneously. And frankly, one of the strongest cases I'm aware of was reported by Michael Shermer, who is the editor of the Skeptical Inquirer. He's a professional skeptic. And he got married several years ago. His wife was very sad because her deceased, I think, father or grandfather wasn't able to be there at the wedding. And so they really, she missed him and she wanted him to be there. And she was expressing that when he had a radio, an old portable radio sitting in a drawer somewhere. And as she's complaining that the grandfather couldn't be at the wedding, the radio came on spontaneously by itself at that moment and was playing a song which happened to have been that grandfather's favorite song.
That's lovely.
Yeah, and I'll give credit to Michael Shermer, who remains a skeptic. I mean, that's his position in life, but he reported that event quite honestly.
Yeah. I often think that many people get these kinds of messages, and often people will say to me, Loretta, this thing happened, or I heard that song, or there was this incident, or this smell, or whatever. Do you think that they're communicating with me? Yeah. Yeah.
These are called after-death communications. They are very common. And sometimes it's really blatant. I've interviewed several people who lost loved ones this way, and the communications were so overwhelming that they ended up becoming professional trance mediums. One of these people, Karen McCarthy, was a war correspondent, a really hard-boiled journalist who was used to going into war zones and reporting completely materialistic. Now, today, she's a spiritualist medium.
Yeah, I love that. What is a physical medium for people that don't know? Mm-hmm.
The physical mediumship is much rarer. It's been reported now for over 150 years. And this is where a medium will go into trance and physical phenomenon occur. The strongest of these phenomenon would be what we call complete spiritual materialization, where a spiritual entity appears in the flesh or in physical form, enough so that they can be photographed, enough so that people can touch them, shake their hands. And sometimes they'll disappear right in front of everybody's eyes. In fact, the journalist Leslie Kean, who has written the book Surviving Death, joined one of these physical mediumship circles and personally witnessed and reported on such materializations, as well as other things, levitations, direct voice, where voices are heard all around the room in which the medium is, the voices of other people, and something called, they use what they call trumpets, which are like megaphones in these seances. The megaphone may start lifting up spontaneously, flying around the room while voices are coming out of it in these seances. So also ectoplasm appears, which is like a smoky substance. It's poorly understood, but it can be photographed. Many times it's been photographed and it sort of exudes from the medium's body. And sometimes then the ectoplasm turns into a materialized person, or at least part of a materialized person, like a hand or a face.
Have you been to any of those things, those demonstrations, those physical mediumship presentations?
You know, I was at one such demonstration many years ago, and it was completely fraudulent.
No, thank you. I wanted to kind of bring that up because some people I know listening are going, "Oh, that's hokey," but there's there are real things out there, people. I'm just letting you know, right?
There are people who will try to make a dollar out of faking these things, and it's unfortunately it's given mediumship a bad name. And if you're inclined to being skeptical, it's easy to dismiss these things because they're so bizarre and so unbelievable. But I've researched psychokinesis and physical phenomena mostly associated with UFOs, but I know that these things are real. And I subscribe to the viewpoint expressed by UFO researcher Jacques Vallée that we need to pay attention to the most bizarre phenomenon that you might say when you hear about these things, it simply can't be true. I refuse to believe it. But those are the things we need to pay the most attention to.
Yeah, I agree with that, by the way, and thank you. I wanted to bring that point out, and you did it so beautifully. I would love to talk more about UFOs. I'm watching our time. I would love to talk about that. But I want to come back to a couple of questions. What is the price that we pay for ignoring the survival of consciousness?
This is crucial. If you go back to the origins of philosophy itself, Socrates used to say, know thyself. Well, knowing thyself means understanding that your consciousness will survive the death of your body. And to the extent that our culture studiously pretends that there is no such valid information, we are denying the possibility of self-awareness in this area. And it's a terrible thing. And I'll go further and say that if the human race wants to join the community of spacefaring civilizations in our galaxy, we obviously have to understand hyperspace, because you have to be able to travel faster than the speed of light if you're in a human body and you want to reach out into the stars. And to understand hyperspace, you have to understand the relationship between consciousness and what I called mind at large earlier, and hyperspace, and also survival of consciousness. If the afterlife exists, it exists somewhere, and the most logical place is in hyperspace, higher dimensions of space than the three we normally experience with our senses. So this is a whole new continent worthy of our exploration, and it's a continent where we're going to discover not only the potential for interstellar space travel, but we'll discover our own true nature.
That's beautiful. Where can people find you? Where can they read your essay? And tell us a little bit about why winning this competition is important, what you hope will happen.
Well, it was described by ABC News as possibly the biggest essay competition ever. I won $500,000 as the grand prize to answer the deepest question ever about survival after death. So it's very significant in that sense. And people can find me through New Thinking Aloud. That's ALLOWED. And New Thinking Aloud is all one word. If you go to newthinkingaloud.com, you'll come to my YouTube channel. I've put up over 1,000 videos on that channel, mostly dealing with parapsychology, which includes life after death and all of the related implications in psychology, philosophy, health, science, and spirituality.
Wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. Jeffrey, it has been such a pleasure to have you here. We have like 30 seconds. Any last thing you would like the audience to take with them today?
The message that I get from people who have visited the afterlife is very simple. Love everyone all the time.
Yeah, that's it. Thank you so much. This is Loretta Brown, my guest, Jeffrey Mishlove, PhD, and do check out Thinking Aloud, ALLOWED. He's got a lot of great things. So much love. Thank you so much. Everybody have a great week. Enjoy the new moon. Don't get into trouble. Bye now.